The scent of simmering lamb hung heavy as Richard Collins, billionaire, spat Arabic insults at Emily, the waitress. "You're nothing," he sneered, certain his words were a secret weapon. But Emily felt a flicker of amusement. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. Under the golden glow of the Manhattan skyline, the evening rush at West Burbage was in full swing. Laughter mixed with a clinking of silverware, and the smell of fresh steak filled the air. At one corner table, families enjoyed their dinners, while at another, business professionals discussed deals over cocktails. Everything felt ordinary until the heavy glass door opened and a man in a tailored navy suit strode inside with a force that changed the energy of the entire place. Richard Collins was his name, a billionaire investor whose reputation for arrogance stretched far beyond Wall Street. He carried himself with a sense of ownership, as though every room he entered belonged to him. The staff had seen wealthy men before, but something about his presence made even the air feel tense. Customers turned their heads, whispering under their breath, curious about what he might do. At that very moment, Emily Carter, a young waitress with chestnut hair tied neatly back and a smile that carried warmth, approached his table. She had worked double shifts that week, saving money for her younger brother's college fees. Her uniform was crisp but modest, and her tired eyes still managed to shine with kindness. She had no idea that tonight would test her patience in ways she had never imagined. As she placed a menu gently in front of him, Richard's shop eyes narrowed. Without warning, his voice thundered across the restaurant in Arabic, words so sharp they seemed to slice through the atmosphere. No one understood exactly what he said, but his tone was unmistakable, scolding, demeaning, as though the young waitress standing before him was nothing more than an inconvenience. Diners stopped eating, forks hovered midair, and silence spread across the room like a heavy curtain. The arrogance was shocking, and for a moment it looked as if Emily might collapse under the weight of his verbal attack. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her notepad. But inside her, a quiet fire sparked to grown up with challenges raised by a single mother who taught her resilience through hardship. What Richard did not know was that Emily had spent years abroad in Jordan with a host family, where she had mastered the Arabic language as fluently as her own. His assumption that no one would understand him was not just arrogant, it was his greatest mistake. Her heart pounded against her chest as she debated her next move. Should she remain silent and let the moment pass, or should she reveal a truth that would shift the balance of power in an instant? The diners leaned forward in their seats, unable to look away. The restaurant manager peeked from behind the counter, torn between stepping in and watching the spectacle unfold. Emily inhaled slowly, steadying her nerves. Her lips parted slightly as though words were about to escape, but she stopped herself. Timing mattered. She wanted her answer to strike with precision, like lightning cutting through a storm. Richard leaned back smugly, mistaking her hesitation for fear, his eyes glittering with superiority. He lifted his glass of water with slow arrogance, as if to seal the humiliation he had delivered. What he did not realize was that Emily was seconds away from giving a response that would not only silence him, but also leave the entire restaurant stunned. And just as the air grew unbearably heavy, Emily raised her head. Her gaze locked onto his with a calm yet unshakable confidence. Every guest in the restaurant held their breath, sensing something remarkable was about to happen. The energy shifted like the pause before a dramatic curtain reveal. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, unaware that in the very next heartbeat, the power he believed he held was about to be ripped from him completely. This was the moment where arrogance met its match, and as Emily's voice prepared to rise, no one in that restaurant, not even Richard himself, could have predicted the storm that was about to unfold. A stillness fell over the restaurant like the quiet before thunder. Richard Cohen smiked, his confidence radiating through the room as if he had already won a battle that no one else even understood. To him, the waitress standing in front of him was powerless, a savant meant only to listen and obey. Yet in that charged silence, Emily Carter lifted her chin and met his gaze with an unflinching calm. The faintest trace of a smile touched her lips, and then with perfect clarity, she spoke back in flawless Arabic. Her words carried strength, respect, and precision, echoing across the room with a fluency that no one had expected. The effect was instantaneous. Conversation stopped, forks clattered against plates, and every pair of eyes in the restaurant fixed on her. Richard's smirk faltered. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. His fingers, which had been drumming confidently on the table, froze in place. The waitress he had tried to humiliate had not only understood his words, but had answered with elegance and poise that cut through his arrogance like glass shattering on marble. A hushed gasp rippled through the restaurant as guests exchanged stunned looks. Some covered their mouths, others leaned in closer, desperate not to miss a single word of this unfolding scene. Emily's voice never wavered. She stood tall, speaking with the ease of someone who had carried this language for years. Each phrase she delivered struck with quiet authority, turning Richard's insults back into mirrors of his own character. The staff peered from behind the counter, their eyes wide with disbelief, while the manager gripped the edge of the register so tightly his knuckles turned white. The room was frozen in suspense, each heartbeat echoing like a drum. Richard leaned forward, his arrogance slipping. His mind raced, trying to calculate how this simple waitress could possibly know the language that he believed was his secret weapon. His jaw tightened, and for a moment he considered speaking again, louder and harsher, to reclaim control. But something about Emily's unwavering composure stopped him. It was not only her fluency that stunned him, it was a quiet power in her tone, a confidence that stripped away his superiority and left him exposed. The customers could feel it too. A woman at a nearby table whispered to her husband, her voice trembling with, "Oh, she speaks better than he does." That single comment spread through the restaurant like a spark in dry grass. People who moments ago had been passive observers were now captivated, invested in every second of the exchange. Emily was no longer just a waitress. In their eyes, she had become a symbol of dignity, standing against arrogance. Inside Emily's chest, her heart pounded furiously, but she refused to let it shell. She remembered the night she had studied under a dim lamp with a Jordanian host family, repeating phrases until her tongue mastered the sounds. She remembered how language had opened doors of connection and respect for her when she felt like an outsider. Now those years of effort had converged into this single defining moment. She was not just answering back to a man who tried to humiliate her. She was defending her own worth in front of an entire room. Richard's face flushed with color. The billionaire who had entered with complete dominance now looked cornered, his ego battling against the weight of reality. He cleared his throat, but no words came. The silence stretched dangerously, thick with tension that left everyone on edge. Emily placed the notepad gently on the table, her hands steady, her eyes unwavering. Then, switching back to English, she spoke clearly, her voice steady enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Respect is not a language," she said softly, but with impact that rang louder than a shout. The words hung in the air, echoing into every corner of the restaurant. Customers shivered as though they had just witnessed history being written in a small New York dining room. And at that exact moment, the dynamic of the entire evening shifted. Richard Collins, a man known for power, wealth, and dominance, sat in silence, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had turned the tables on him. The restaurant buzzed with energy, anticipation building for what would happen next. The restaurant had become a stage, and every soul inside sat as an audience, unable to blink or breathe too loudly, afraid to miss even a heartbeat of what was unfolding. Richard Collins, a billionaire accustomed to bending boardrooms and government officials to his will, sat in stunned silence, his hand gripping the stem of his glass, but not daring to raise it. Across from him, Emily Carter stood unshaken, her words of Arabic still echoing in the minds of those who had just witnessed a transformation from a quiet waitress into a figure of extraordinary strength. The atmosphere carried electricity, a tension so sharp that it pressed down on everyone present. Richard's pride, however, did not allow him to remain silent for long. His lips curled into a forced smile, the kind that hid embarrassment under a layer of arrogance. "Interesting," he muttered, his voice carrying across the tables. Switching back to English, he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You must think that one clever phrase in Arabic changes who you are. You are still a waitress. You serve. I command." His words dripped with disdain, but underneath there was a tremor, a weakness that those listening could feel. The balance had shifted, and Richard was clawing desperately to drag it back. Emily did not flinch at his gaze with a calm steadiness that made him appear smaller by comparison. Her voice, when it returned, was even and clear, carrying a weight that silenced any whisper in the room. "Languages open doors, Mr. Collins, but respect opens hearts. Without that, your wealth is empty noise." Her words were not loud, but their impact was louder than any raised voice could ever be. The restaurant erupted in subtle gasps, and a few guests even nodded in approval, their admiration for her growing with every sentence. Richard's jaw clenched for a man used to applause, obedience, and flattery. This quiet defiance was unbearable. He wanted to shout, to throw his authority like a hammer onto the room, but he could feel the eyes around him. Every diner, every server, even the cooks peeking from the kitchen door had become silent judges of his behavior. The billionaire who once controlled markets with a phone call was losing control inside a simple restaurant. Emily, meanwhile, felt the strength of something greater rising within her. She remembered her mother's voice telling her as a child that no one's status or wealth defined her worth. She remembered the nights she worked through exhaustion just to keep her family afloat, the way she promised her younger brother she would ensure his education no matter what it cost her. Those memories fueled her, turning her fear into power. Standing before Richard, she was no longer only a waitress. She was every person who had ever been underestimated. A man at the bar clapped once softly, but the sound carried. Richard's head snapped in that direction, his glaze sharp enough to cut, yet the damage was already done. The room was no longer on his side. They were with Emily. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar as though the air had suddenly grown hot and suffocating. For the first time in decades, Richard felt something foreign. Exposure, vulnerability, and a creeping sense that his name, his money, his legacy meant nothing in this moment. Emily leaned closer, her voice dropping just enough so that only those straining to listen could catch every word. "Power without humility is weakness in disguise," she whispered, and the entire restaurant froze. It was a dagger of truth dressed in gentleness, and Richard felt it pierce deeper than any insult could. The billionaire opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His arrogance, his shield, his identity, all of it trembled under the weight of a waitress who had chosen dignity over fear. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder, pressing down on everyone in that restaurant. At that moment, Richard Collins realized he was no longer in control. The question now was not whether Emily would break, but how much further she was willing to go. The audience of diners leaned in, hearts pounding, eager to see whether the man who thought he could command the world would be brought to his knees by the very person he tried to humiliate. And as the tension swelled to its peak, one truth became undeniable. The night was far from over, and the final blow had yet to fall. The silence inside Westbridge Grill was thick enough to feel, a silence that pulsed with anticipation. Richard Collins sat rigid in his chair, his chest rising and falling faster than he wanted anyone to notice. His wealth had bought him rooms full of respect, boardrooms full of obedience, and even nations that bent to his money. Yet here, in this modest restaurant, surrounded by ordinary diners, he was being dismantled piece by piece by a young woman who wore a waitress uniform and carried herself with unshakable dignity. Emily Carter stood tall, her hands steady at her sides, her eyes never breaking contact with his. In that moment, she knew she had already won something more valuable than money. She had won the respect of every single person watching. Her Arabic reply had shocked them. Her calm responses had captivated them, but it was her strength that held them prisoner in their seats. The billionaire had tried to humiliate her, but now he was the one drowning under the weight of his own arrogance. Richard finally pushed back his chair and rose to his feet, hoping his towering frame would reclaim some authority. He straightened his suit jacket, cleared his throat, and looked down at Emily. "You may have surprised them," he said, his voice sharp, "but do not fool yourself. You are still beneath me. You serve food. I build empires." His words rang out with a hollow bravado, the desperate cries of a man who could feel his image crumbling. The audience heard the weakness underneath, and it only deepened their silence. Emily stepped closer, her presence unshaken, her voice calm, but carrying like a bell. Empire is built on pride, always full. Mr. Collins, respect and kindness last longer than wealth ever will. The sentence sliced through the tension with a power that no amount of shouting could match. A murmur spread through the room as diners whispered, their admiration for Emily rising with every second. Some even pulled out their phones pretending to check messages, but secretly recording, unwilling to lose a moment of what felt like history unfolding in real time. Richard's face turned crimson. He was not used to being challenged, especially not in public, and never by someone he believed was beneath him. Yet no matter how much he searched for words, none came that could silence the storm he had unleashed. Every attempt at regaining control slipped further away. Emily had shifted the balance forever. At that moment, the restaurant manager stepped forward cautiously, torn between fear of upsetting a billionaire and pride in his employee. But before he could speak, a man in a gray suit at the corner table stood. He had been quiet the entire evening, observing with sharp eyes. As he approached, the diners turned to watch him, sensing his importance. Richard looked relieved for a moment, assuming the man might intervene in his favor. But when the stranger stopped beside Emily and extended his hand, the truth unfolded like a curtain being drawn. "Emily Carter," the man said warmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone with influence. "I'm Michael Anderson, Director of International Investments. I have been searching for someone exactly like you. The way you carried yourself tonight, the way you spoke, the way you refused to be broken. This is leadership. If you are interested, I would like to offer you a position on my team. Your knowledge of Arabic and your strength under pressure are qualities money cannot buy." The entire restaurant erupted in astonishment. Richard's mouth fell open, his confidence shattering completely. The billionaire who thought he could belittle a waitress had just witnessed her being elevated in front of him, offered an opportunity that his arrogance could never match. The diners applauded, some standing that she is filling the restaurant with an energy that washed over Emily like sunlight. Emily blinked, stunned by the sudden tan, but she quickly found her voice. She shook Michael's hand firmly, gratitude shining in her eyes. She did not thank Richard, nor did she gloat. Instead, she turned to the audience of diners and said softly, "Respect is free. Everyone deserves it." Her words were simple, but they landed with the force of truth, embedding themselves in the hearts of everyone listening. Richard, defeated, adjusted his cufflinks one last time and left without a word. His footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each one a reminder that arrogance had no power against dignity. The moment the door closed behind him, the applause grew louder, and Emily stood surrounded by admiration, her strength immortalized in the memory of everyone who had been there. That night, the billionaire left with silence, but Emily left with something greater. She left with respect, opportunity, and the knowledge that no voice, no matter how loud or wealthy, could ever silence the power of truth spoken with courage.